The Union flagship glided through the calm black of space, its silver surface reflecting the light of a nearby star. Inside the vessel, human envoy Aaron sat quietly in his assigned chamber. He was dressed in simple diplomatic robes, nothing elaborate, nothing decorated. He stared at the stars through a wide window and let the silence of the moment settle around him. Aaron had traveled many light years from Earth to reach this place. The Sarathi Dominion had requested a formal meeting with humanity. Their queen, Ceres, had specifically asked for the presence of a human envoy. To most people, this invitation would have been considered an honor. To Aaron, it felt like a heavy burden. He had read reports of the Sarathi, taller than humans, armored by nature, and gifted with a sense of superiority that had cowed many other species. Whole civilizations had bent under their influence, agreeing to treaties that left them dependent and submissive. But humanity was different. Humanity had survived its own storms, its own struggles, and had grown into a people who never forgot what it meant to stand upright in difficult times. The ship's captain entered the chamber. "Envoy Aaron, we will arrive in Sarathi space within the hour. The Queen has prepared a grand welcome." Aaron nodded. "Thank you, Captain." He said no more. The captain studied him for a moment, then gave a respectful bow and left. Aaron remained seated, but his thoughts moved quickly. The Sarathi were not evil, at least not in the way some expected. They were proud to the point of blindness. They expected submission because they had received it for generations. Yet Aaron knew that the moment humanity knelt without question, it would lose the very spirit that made it strong. The flagship crossed into Sarathi space, and the sight before the crew drew a hush of awe. Dozens of massive Sarathi warships hung in formation, their black and gold hulls glowing with faint symbols. They were silent guardians of the Dominion, and they dwarfed the Union vessel. But Aaron did not stare in wonder. He had seen the strength of giants before, and he knew strength could also be brittle. The Sarathi docking platform extended, and the ship connected with it. Aaron walked down the polished corridor alone. The Sarathi had insisted that he come without guards. It was a test of trust, or perhaps a display of their confidence. He carried no weapon, no device other than a translator that rested lightly on his collar. The great hall of the Sarathi palace was unlike anything he had seen. Columns of black stone reached upward, carved with golden lines that shimmered like flowing rivers. The floor reflected his steps as if it were made of glass. At the far end of the hall sat Queen Ceres upon a throne of crystal and obsidian. She was tall, her presence commanding, her armor like scales catching the light with a faint silver glow. Her eyes were sharp, filled with expectation. Around her stood dozens of Sarathi nobles, their heads high, their cloaks heavy with jewels. All eyes turned to the human who dared walk with such calmness. Other envoys from smaller civilizations had once tripped over themselves to show respect, rushing to bow low before the queen. Aaron did not. He walked at a steady pace and stopped at a respectful distance, but he did not kneel. He placed one hand over his chest and inclined his head slightly, nothing more. A whisper spread across the court. Some nobles looked offended. Others looked amused, waiting to see how the queen would react. Queen Ceres studied him in silence. Her voice was calm but strong when she spoke. "Human envoy, you arrive as requested. Yet I notice something curious. In the moments of ceremony, when others come close, you remain distant. You avoid my gaze when you leave the hall. You pass by invitations as though they were burdens. Why is this so?" Aaron looked at her, his face steady. "I am here to speak on behalf of humanity, Your Majesty." "Nothing more." The queen tilted her head. "And yet you avoid me. You avoid my court. I wish to know why." The hall grew silent again. No one dared move. The Sarathi nobles expected him to falter, to stammer, to kneel at last under her gaze. Aaron did not. His eyes moved briefly across the hall, then returned to the queen, but he did not answer. Not yet. He remembered the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the first transmission from the Sarathi Dominion, full of polite phrases but laced with a tone of command. He remembered how the Union Council had argued for days. Some wanted to join the Dominion quickly, believing it would offer safety. Others feared that such a union would mean the end of independence. Aaron had volunteered to serve as envoy not because he was eager to bow, but because he knew what humans must show, that they were not like the others. The queen leaned forward on her throne. Do you think silence protects you, human envoy Aaron? Aaron's voice was calm. No, your majesty. Silence gives me time to consider the weight of my words. The nobles shifted uneasily. To them it sounded too bold. But Queen Ceres raised a hand, silencing them before they could speak. She was intrigued. At that moment a messenger entered the hall and bowed deeply. Your majesty, the banquet is prepared. The queen stood, her silver armor shining. Envoy Aaron, you will join us. Tonight you will sit at my side. Aaron's calm expression did not change. He inclined his head again. As you command. The banquet hall was grand, filled with long tables covered in foods from across Sarathi space. The nobles filled the room with laughter and chatter, but their eyes continued to turn toward the single human guest. They watched him carefully, expecting him to stumble or show awe. Aaron ate politely, spoke when spoken to, and showed no sign of unease. The queen sat beside him, her presence strong. She did not allow the distance he had kept in the throne room. She leaned close and asked questions about humanity, about Earth, about the struggles of humankind. Aaron answered each one honestly but without flattery. He described humanity's long history of storms and survival. He spoke of mistakes but also of resilience. The nobles listened in silence. To them, humans sounded strange. They were not powerful like the Sarathi, not ancient like the other races, yet they spoke of survival with a quiet pride that felt unfamiliar. As the banquet ended, Aaron stood and prepared to leave. The queen's voice stopped him once again. Human envoy, you cannot avoid me forever. I will ask again. Why do you step aside when I pass? Why do you not seek my gaze? Why do you remain distant? The hall fell silent. The queen's words echoed, carrying weight, all eyes fixed on Aaron, waiting for the answer. Aaron stood tall, his expression calm, his voice steady. He looked at the queen without fear. He did not answer yet, but the silence itself carried power. The court leaned forward, expecting something they had never heard before. The queen's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in curiosity. She could sense that this human would not give the answer tonight. Yet she knew he would, and when he did, it might shake the hall more deeply than any battle cry. And so, the first day ended with a question left hanging in the air, a question that no one had dared to ask before. The alien queen wanted to know why the human avoided her, and the human was preparing to give her an answer that would change the balance between their worlds. The second day in the Sarathi Dominion began with the rising light of their twin suns, casting long shadows across the palace. Aaron stood on a balcony outside his chamber, gazing at the sprawling city below. Towers of black stone rose high, linked by glowing bridges that carried streams of Sarathi citizens. The air shimmered faintly with energy from shields and transport lines. It was unlike any human city, yet Aaron felt no awe. He observed it with calm eyes, as if studying a pattern in sand. A knock came at his chamber door. A tall Sarathi attendant entered, bowing low. Envoy Aaron, Her Majesty requests your presence in the Hall of Voices. She wishes to speak with you before the council gathers. Aaron nodded once. I will attend. The attendant led him through winding corridors. The palace seemed designed to remind visitors of their smallness. Every ceiling was higher than needed, every hall wide enough to carry echoes. Statues of ancient Sarathi warriors stood along the way, their eyes carved sharp and proud. The Sarathi were a people who remembered their victories and displayed them with pride. At last, the doors to the Hall of Voices opened. Inside, the ceiling arched so high it vanished in shadow. Rows of nobles lined the sides, their cloaks brushing the floor. At the far end, Queen Ceres waited, seated upon a simpler throne than the one from the day before. Her gaze fixed on Aaron the moment he entered. He walked forward at the same steady pace, stopping at the proper distance. Again he bowed his head slightly, hand over his chest, but he did not kneel. A murmur rippled through the nobles, just as it had before. The queen's voice carried clearly. Human envoy, yesterday you left my question unanswered. I asked why you avoid me, why you step aside when I pass, and why you do not seek my gaze. Today you will answer. Aaron met her eyes. His voice was calm. Your Majesty, I have no wish to give offense. I choose distance not out of disrespect but out of principle. The nobles stirred. Principle was not a word they expected from a guest who stood before their queen. Queen Ceres lifted a hand and silence returned. Principle, she repeated. Explain this principle that keeps you from my presence. Aaron drew a slow breath. Humanity has walked a difficult path. We are not the oldest race nor the strongest. For much of our history, we stood alone. We fought storms, hunger, and even ourselves. What gave us strength was not fear of kings or queens, not worship of rulers, but the belief that every human can stand upright without being forced to kneel. To kneel is not in itself dishonor, but to kneel without choice is to lose what makes us human. That is why I avoid you, Your Majesty. Not because I reject you, but because I must show that humanity will not bow by habit. A silence filled the hall. The nobles shifted uneasily, shocked that a single envoy dared to speak in this way. Some looked ready to protest, but the queen raised her hand again. She studied Aaron with sharp eyes, but there was no anger in them. Only curiosity. You speak boldly, she said. Others would call such words dangerous. Aaron did not waver. Perhaps. But truth remains truth, even if it is unwelcome. The queen leaned back, resting one arm upon the throne. Do you not fear me, human? I fear mistakes, Aaron replied. I fear losing what makes us who we are. But you, Queen Ceres, I do not fear. Respect is not the same as fear. The nobles gasped again. Some whispered angrily. No envoy had ever spoken so directly. Yet the queen raised her hand once more, commanding silence. Her lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile. Very well, she said. Let the council hear these words. The sound of great doors opening filled the hall as more figures entered. These were counselors of the Dominion, elders whose voices guided Sarathi policy. They took their seats in a wide circle. Aaron was placed in the center with the queen seated at the highest point of the ring. The council meeting began. One by one, Sarathi counselors spoke of the Dominion's strength, of the alliances they had forged, of the worlds that thrived under their rule. Each word was meant to impress, to overwhelm, to remind the human of Sarathi greatness. When it was Aaron's turn to speak, he did not raise his voice or fill the air with long speeches. He simply said, humanity does not seek to be ruled. We seek friendship, trade, and peace. We will not kneel as subjects. A heavy silence followed. The counselors turned their heads toward the queen, waiting for her reaction. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied Aaron with a thoughtful gaze. Finally, she said, You stand before ships greater than any of your kind has built. You sit in a hall older than your world's history. You are surrounded by those who could command your silence with a single gesture, and yet you refuse to bow. Why? Aaron's reply was steady. Because kneeling without reason is surrender. Because strength is not only measured in ships and halls. Strength is measured in the will to remain true even when standing alone. The hall grew quiet again. Some nobles seemed angered, but others looked uncertain, even impressed. The queen rose from her throne, her silver-scaled form towering above the human envoy. She walked down the steps, and the sound of her approach echoed in the vast chamber. She stopped only a few steps from Aaron. Her eyes searched his face as if seeking weakness. You are different from the others who come here. They bend quickly. They seek favor. You do not. I will discover if this is pride or truth. Aaron met her gaze without moving. You may test me as you wish, Your Majesty. My answer will remain the same. The queen turned back to her throne, her steps calm and measured. She seated herself once again. So be it, you will remain as my guest. Tomorrow you will walk with me through the Hall of Ancestors. There we will see if your words hold when faced with the weight of history. The council ended soon after. Aaron was escorted back to his chamber, but whispers followed him through the halls. Some nobles called him reckless. Others whispered that perhaps the human carried a strength the Sarathi had not expected. Servants bowed lower when he passed, though he never demanded it. Later that night, Aaron sat once more by the wide window of his chamber. He looked at the stars beyond the shielded sky. He thought of Earth, of the council that had trusted him with this mission. He thought of the queen's piercing eyes and the challenge she had given him. He knew the days ahead would test him more than words alone, but he also knew this: he would not bow without reason. He would not betray the spirit of his people. And so, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon of the Sarathi homeworld, the human envoy prepared for another day. He was a single figure among giants, but his calm refusal to kneel had already set change in motion. The next morning began with the sound of horns echoing through the palace. The Hall of Ancestors was opening for a rare ceremony, and Queen Ceres had chosen to bring the human envoy with her. To the Sarathi nobles, this was a shocking gesture. The Hall of Ancestors was sacred, a place where the Dominion kept memories of victories and reminders of their power. To allow a human into that space was seen as either a bold test or a dangerous mistake. Aaron walked beside the queen through long corridors that led deeper into the heart of the palace. The walls here were not polished stone but living crystal, glowing faintly as though remembering the touch of countless generations. The Sarathi guards that flanked the path carried spears tipped with energy blades, their steps in perfect rhythm. "Do you know where we go, human envoy?" the queen asked, her voice carrying easily in the silence of the corridor. Aaron shook his head. "I know only that it is a place of your history." The queen's eyes lingered on him. "It is more than that. It is the foundation of our pride. When you see what lies within, perhaps you will understand why others kneel." At last, the doors to the Hall of Ancestors opened. They were massive, carved from a single piece of stone black as night and lined with golden runes. The doors moved without a sound and the hall revealed itself. It stretched farther than the eye could follow. Statues of Sarathi leaders lined both sides, each one carved larger than life. Murals on the walls told of battles across the stars, victories over species long forgotten, and the expansion of the Dominion. The ceiling arched high, painted with constellations and rivers of light. The air itself seemed heavy with memory. The nobles who entered bowed deeply to the statues, some even kneeling before their chosen ancestor. The queen walked calmly, her head high, her steps strong. Aaron followed her, his gaze steady. He studied the statues, the murals, the weight of history on display. But he did not kneel. The whispers began again. Some nobles muttered that the human was arrogant, that he disrespected their sacred hall. Others watched more carefully, curious if his silence held more meaning. The queen stopped before the statue of a warrior king who had once united the Sarathi clans. His carved eyes glared down with eternal strength, his weapon raised as if to strike the air itself. "This one," the queen said, "was Sarakar I. He took a divided people and forged an empire. His enemies knelt before him, and in kneeling they gained survival. Tell me, human, do you not see the wisdom in bending to strength?" Aaron looked up at the statue, then at the queen. His voice was calm. "I see strength, yes, but I also see fear. To kneel because of fear is not wisdom. It is only survival. Survival without dignity leaves little worth protecting." The hall grew silent again. The nobles stared at him, their expressions caught between shock and anger. Yet the queen did not raise her voice. Instead, she studied him with thoughtful eyes. "You speak of dignity as if it were equal to life," she said. "For humanity it is," Aaron replied. "Life without dignity is a chain. We do not wish to live as a people forever bound by another's pride." The queen's gaze did not waver. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned and continued walking. Aaron followed, and the nobles trailed behind, their whispers filling the air once more. Deeper in the hall, they reached the chamber of memory. Here the walls glowed with living crystal that stored visions of the past. With a gesture of her hand, the queen summoned one such vision. The air shimmered and a battle unfolded before their eyes. Sarathi warships clashed with a fleet of another species. Blazing energy filled the skies, and the Sarathi crushed their foes with overwhelming might. The defeated ships burned, their wreckage falling into the void. The queen's voice was steady. "This is what it means to resist us. Those who knelt live, those who refused were destroyed. Do you still say you will not kneel?" Aaron stood firm. His voice did not rise, but his words carried clearly. "I say that humanity will choose its own path. If that path leads to defeat, we will accept it. But we will not trade our spirit for safety." The vision faded. Silence fell again. The queen's eyes narrowed, but still no anger showed in her face. Instead, she asked quietly, "And if kneeling brought you more than safety, if kneeling gave you wealth, knowledge, and power beyond your imagination, would you still refuse?" "Yes," Aaron said. "Because if we kneel without choice, we would never rise again. Power gained at the cost of freedom is not strength. It is weakness dressed as glory." The queen studied him for a long moment. Around them, the nobles grew restless. Some muttered that the human insulted their ancestors. Others whispered that his words carried an unfamiliar kind of power. Finally, the queen turned away from the vision. She walked to the far end of the hall where a massive crystal stood, pulsing with light. "This is the heart of memory," she said. "It holds the vows of my people. Every ruler of the Dominion has sworn upon it to protect our strength and keep our pride. Today I will ask you to stand before it." Aaron approached the crystal. The light within it shifted, pulsing brighter as he drew near. The nobles gasped softly. Never before had the heart reacted to a foreign presence. The queen's eyes widened slightly, though her voice remained calm. "Place your hand upon it, human." Aaron did as asked. His hand rested against the crystal and the light flared, filling the hall with a white glow. The nobles shielded their eyes. The queen stared in silence, her expression unreadable. When the light dimmed, the hall was still. The queen spoke at last. It seems the heart does not reject you. Perhaps it sees truth in your words. Perhaps it sees strength where others see defiance. Aaron lowered his hand. The heart knows only what is real. Humanity will not kneel. We will walk beside others, but not behind them. The queen's gaze lingered on him. For the first time, her voice softened. You speak with a weight that stirs even the heart of memory. I will consider what this means. She turned and began to walk back through the hall. The nobles followed in silence, their whispers gone. The air was heavy, as if the hall itself waited for what would come next. That evening, in the quiet of his chamber, Aaron reflected on what had happened. He had not expected the heart to respond to him. He had not sought to challenge their sacred traditions. Yet the truth of humanity's spirit had spoken through him, and the Sarathi had witnessed it. He knew the queen would not forget. Nor would her nobles. The days ahead would test him further, but he had already planted a seed of doubt in their certainty, and a seed of respect that might grow into something greater. Outside, the twin suns sank again, casting the city in shades of silver and red. Somewhere deep in the palace, Queen Sarah sat alone, replaying the human's words in her mind. She was not yet ready to show it, but for the first time in many years she felt the weight of a question. What if strength was not in the kneeling of others, but in the standing of equals? The palace bells rang across the Sarathi city, their low sound rolling like thunder over the tall towers. It was the third day of Aaron's visit, and tension already rested heavy in the air. Rumors of the human envoy's words had spread through the court. Some nobles whispered that the queen showed too much patience. Others believed she had seen something in him that they could not understand. Aaron prepared himself quietly in his chamber. He stood before the tall window, adjusting the simple robe he had brought from the Union. The Sarathi had offered him garments lined with jewels, but he had refused. He would not appear dressed in another people's pride. He would appear only as himself, a man who carried his people's voice. A knock came at the door. The same tall attendant entered, bowing deeply. Envoy Aaron, Her Majesty summons you to the Chamber of the Crown. It is a place rarely opened. You are to walk with her alone. Aaron gave a single nod. Lead the way. The corridors were silent as he followed the attendant. Guards bowed low as he passed. The Chamber of the Crown was hidden deep within the palace. Its doors were carved from a strange metal that shimmered like water, etched with symbols older than the Dominion itself. When the doors opened, Aaron stepped into a room bathed in soft light. Queen Sarah stood at the center, dressed not in her heavy throne armor but in lighter ceremonial robes. A crown of silver rested upon her brow, its points reaching upward like rays of light. Around her, the chamber walls glowed with lines of living crystal that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. You arrive, she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes studied him with care. Today we stand without court, without counsel. Only you and I will speak. The time for half answers has passed. Aaron inclined his head slightly. I am ready to listen and ready to answer. The queen gestured to a small circle in the center of the chamber. 2 seats faced each other, crafted from stone polished until it shone like glass. She took one, and with a motion of her hand she invited Aaron to sit. When he did, silence stretched for a long moment. The queen finally spoke. I asked you why you avoid me, why you refuse to kneel. You gave me words of principle and dignity. Yet there is more. I see it in your eyes. Speak it now. Tell me the whole truth. Aaron met her gaze. His voice remained calm, but each word carried weight. The truth is simple. I avoid you because I cannot treat you as the others do. They kneel because they see you as something beyond themselves, a figure too high to reach. I avoid you because if I stood close and allowed myself to fall into that same habit, I would betray the spirit of my people. Humanity does not worship rulers. Humanity stands with them or against them, but always as equals. If I seemed distant, it was because I refused to pretend otherwise. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, though not with anger. She studied him as though weighing each syllable. You speak of equals. Do you believe yourself my equal, human? Aaron did not hesitate. Not by power, not by strength of armies, not by the age of my people, but by the measure that matters most, by will, by the right to stand. In that, yes, I am your equal. The chamber pulsed faintly with light as his words echoed. The queen leaned back in her seat, her silver crown glinting. For the first time, her voice softened. No one has spoken to me in this way. Not in all my years as queen. Aaron's gaze did not waver. Then perhaps that is what was needed. For a long while, the queen said nothing. Her eyes shifted as if seeing memories from long ago. She had ruled for decades, had watched rulers of other races bow quickly to her authority. Even those who resisted did so with anger or fear. Yet this human stood calm, never raising his voice, never showing trembling, and still refusing to kneel. Finally, she rose from her seat and walked to the edge of the chamber. The light from the crystals followed her steps. "Do you know what it means to wear this crown, human?" she asked quietly. Aaron shook his head. "I know only what I see. It is heavy with expectation." The queen turned, her voice carrying more openly now. "This crown carries the memory of countless rulers. It is not only a symbol of power, but a chain of duty. Every day I bear the pride of my people, and every day I must prove that their pride is not empty. To kneel before me is not simply to honor me, but to honor all who came before me. Do you understand this burden?" Aaron's voice was steady. "I understand. But I also know this. If honor must always be shown by kneeling, then it is no longer honor. It is habit. True honor is given freely, not demanded. That is why I avoid you. I will not give false honor. When I give respect, it will be real." The queen's breath caught slightly, though her face remained composed. The words struck deeper than she expected. For so long, she had seen kneeling as proof of loyalty. But the human's calm refusal had made her question whether loyalty given without freedom had any true meaning. She stepped closer, her tall form casting a long shadow across the stone floor. She stood directly before him, her crown glowing faintly in the crystal light. "If what you say is true, then tell me this. If I commanded you now to kneel, what would you do?" Aaron looked up at her without hesitation. "I would remain standing." The silence that followed was heavier than any before. The chamber lights dimmed as if the crystals themselves held their breath. The queen stared at him, waiting for fear to show in his eyes. None came. At last she exhaled slowly and stepped back. "You are bold. Perhaps too bold. Yet your words carry truth. I do not know if my people will accept it, but I cannot deny it." She turned away, her robe flowing behind her, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her crown not as strength, but as a question. Could pride without freedom truly last? Could loyalty demanded hold greater power than loyalty freely given? When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost to herself. "Perhaps it is I who should avoid you, human, for you place doubts in a heart that once knew only certainty." Aaron rose from his seat. "Doubt is not weakness, your majesty. It is the beginning of understanding. It is the mark of those who still seek truth." The queen turned back to face him, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a single nod. "Tomorrow the court will gather once more. There you will speak your final words before my nobles. If they find them empty, you will leave in shame. If they find them true, then change may begin. Do you accept this test?" Aaron's voice was calm. "I accept." The queen inclined her head slightly, and for a moment her eyes softened, though her voice remained firm. "Then prepare yourself, human envoy. Tomorrow you may stand taller than you have ever stood before." The chamber doors opened once more, and Aaron was led out by the attendant. The nobles waiting outside watched him carefully, whispering among themselves. Some still called him arrogant. Others began to wonder if perhaps his refusal to kneel held more power than all the bows they had given their queen. That night, Aaron sat again at his window, looking toward the stars. He thought of the queen's questions, of her voice when she spoke of her crown. He sensed that behind her proud presence was a ruler searching for something deeper than submission, and he knew the next day would decide not only his fate, but the first step of a new path between their peoples. Far across the palace, Queen Ceres removed her crown and placed it gently upon its stand. For the first time, she looked at it not only as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of the burden she carried. She closed her eyes and thought of the human's words. Respect must be real, not forced. Honor must be chosen, not demanded. And as the twin moons rose above the Sarathi sky, she knew the day ahead would test not only the human, but herself. The morning of the final gathering came with a quiet stillness over the Sarathi palace. The sky outside was washed in silver light as the twin suns rose together. The towers gleamed, but the streets below were hushed. Word had spread across the Dominion that the human envoy would speak before the nobles one last time. Some expected his downfall. Others whispered that something greater might take place. Aron stood in his chamber, calm as always. He had slept little, spending the night in thought. He knew what awaited him. The queen had promised him a test before her nobles, and he understood the meaning. His words would be weighed not only by her but by an entire court raised on pride and tradition. A knock sounded at the door. The familiar Sarathi attendant entered and bowed deeply. "Envoy Aron, the court gathers. Her Majesty awaits." Aron nodded once and followed. The corridors seemed longer than before, each step echoing against the high stone walls. Guards lined the way, their spears gleaming, their eyes fixed forward. They did not speak, but Aron could feel their curiosity pressing against him. At last the great doors of the throne hall opened. The chamber was filled with nobles, their cloaks shining with jewels, their faces stern. Murmurs rippled through them as Aron entered, walking with steady steps. At the far end, Queen Sarah sat upon her high throne, crowned and armored once more. She was a figure of strength, tall and commanding, her silver scales glowing faintly in the light of the hall. The moment Aron stepped inside, the murmurs ceased. The hall fell into silence. He walked to the center and stopped, placing his hand over his chest and bowing his head slightly as he always did. But he did not kneel. The queen's voice rose, clear and strong. "Human envoy, today you stand before the full court of the Dominion. Your words will be heard by all. Yesterday you claimed that you avoid me not from fear or disrespect but from principle. Today you must prove those words hold truth." Aron lifted his head and met her gaze. "I will speak only what is true." The queen gestured with her hand. "Then speak. Tell us why humanity does not kneel." Aron let the silence rest for a moment before his voice filled the hall. "We do not kneel because to kneel without choice is to lose what makes us human. Our history is full of storms, hunger, and struggle. We have survived not because someone stronger shielded us, but because we stood and endured. We respect strength, but we do not worship it. We honor leaders, but we do not make them gods. To kneel before you without reason would be false respect, and false respect has no worth." The nobles stirred. Some shook their heads in anger. Others leaned forward, listening more carefully than before. The queen raised her hand and silence fell again. She spoke, her tone steady. "You speak of survival and dignity, but tell me this. If kneeling would save your people from destruction, if it would bring them safety for generations, would you still refuse?" Aron's reply came without pause. "Yes, because safety bought with chains is not life. It is a slow fading of spirit. A people who forget how to stand will one day forget who they are." A murmur rippled again, this time softer, thoughtful. Some nobles exchanged uncertain glances. The queen studied him with sharp eyes. "Then tell us, human," she said, her voice carrying like thunder. "What makes humanity strong, if not ships or armies? What gives you the right to stand here and claim equality with the Sarathi?" Aron's voice grew firmer. "What makes us strong is not the size of our fleets or the weight of our crowns. It is the will to endure. It is the belief that every life has worth, that no ruler stands above that worth. We stumble, we fall, we make mistakes, but we rise again. That is humanity's strength. Not perfection, not pride, but the courage to rise again." The hall fell into complete silence. Even the guards seemed frozen, their eyes fixed on the lone human standing in the center. The queen sat motionless, her gaze locked on him. Finally, she rose from her throne. The sound of her steps echoed as she walked down the long stairs, her presence towering over him. She stopped only a few steps away. Her crown caught the light, her silver scales glowing like fire. She looked down at him, her eyes piercing. "Every envoy I have ever received has knelt before me," she said quietly, though her voice carried. "They bowed out of fear or out of desire for favor. You alone have refused. You stand, even when surrounded by those who would see you kneel. You speak of dignity, of honor given freely. Tell me, human, do you believe I am unworthy of your respect?" Aron's answer was calm and clear. "No, your majesty. I believe you are worthy of respect. That is why I cannot give it falsely. When I give respect, it must be real. That is why I stand." The queen's eyes widened slightly. For a long moment she said nothing. The hall waited, holding its breath. Then slowly she lowered herself to one knee. A shock swept through the nobles. Gasps filled the chamber. The queen of the Sarathi, the unyielding ruler of a proud dominion, was kneeling before a human envoy. Her voice rang out firm and steady. I kneel not in surrender but in recognition. I kneel to a truth long forgotten by my people. Strength is not in demanding the bow of others. Strength is in standing as equals and giving respect freely. You human have reminded me of this, and for that I honor you." The nobles stared in disbelief. Some could not accept what they saw, but others lowered their heads, unsure how to respond. The hall that had once demanded kneeling now trembled with the weight of change. Aaron did not move for a moment. He looked at the queen, his expression calm. Then he bowed his head slightly, the same gesture he had always given. But this time it carried new meaning. "Then we meet as equals, your majesty." The queen rose, her tall form shining in the hall's light. She turned to her nobles. "Let it be known that humanity does not kneel before the Dominion. They stand beside us. Their envoy has shown us that respect cannot be forced. It must be earned. From this day forward, let the Dominion remember this truth." The hall was filled with silence once more, but it was not the silence of disapproval. It was the silence of a people shaken to their core. Some nobles would resist, but others would carry the queen's words into every corner of the Dominion. Later, as the gathering ended, the queen walked beside Aaron through the palace halls. Her voice was quiet now, meant only for him. "Your answer has changed me. I will not forget it," Aaron replied with steady calm. "Nor will I forget that you chose to listen." They walked in silence after that, but it was not the silence of distance. It was the silence of two paths beginning to meet. That night, as the stars shone over the Sarathi world, both queen and envoy sat in their separate chambers, thinking of the day's events. For the queen, it was the first time she had knelt not out of tradition, but out of choice. For Aaron, it was proof that even among giants, humanity could stand tall. And so the story of the human who made the alien queen kneel spread across the Dominion, not as a tale of conquest, not as a story of fear, but as a reminder that true strength is found not in forcing others down, but in choosing to rise together.